Here they're described, and they will come and devour those amongst God's people who reject his coming Messiah and promised salvation. They don't want it. They don't care about it. They will prey upon God's people. Why? Because, as verse 10 says, their watchmen lead them astray, those who are supposed to be warning them. The watchmen, they were the ones who were up on the wall of a city, and they were supposed to be watching for the enemy. Here it says they're watchmen. These are spiritual leaders. They're blind. They're ignorant. They don't care about God's people. This is speaking of the spiritual watchman. Ezekiel was called a watchman, Ezekiel 3 and Ezekiel 33. You are my watchman, God says, and he was a faithful watchman. God's spiritual overseers were to be on continual lookout for false teachers. They were to be on continual lookout for moral corruption amongst God's people. And they were to be on lookout for God's people straying from the Lord, going off into the world, hanging around the world. They have no fellowship with the world, we're told. What fellowship do we have with the world? What fellowship has light with darkness? I hang around with unbelievers for fun? That is not what I'm to be doing. I'm to be witnessing to them and drawing them, not being drawn into their world. Unfortunately for the Jews, their spiritual leaders, especially when it came to the arrival of the Messiah, you see the scribes and the Pharisees and others, but that's the way it was all along through their history. Their leaders were blind and ignorant, as verse 10 says, thinking only of themselves. Even though they were supposed to be God's spokesman, they didn't speak out, which means to be barking. You should be going, dude, come and don't do that. When it came to corruption amongst God's people, they were supposed to be crying out. Because as verse 11 says, they didn't do it because instead they wanted to fill their pockets. They were all about making themselves wealthy. You see that a lot today, unfortunately, in church leadership. The Lord comes back and it's like, dude, here's somebody with a couple mansions and all kinds of wealth. Why do you have this, dude? It's crazy, but this is, who he's speaking, a blind watchman who are just greedy for gain, and they're all about selfish pleasure, as it talks about in verse 12, getting drunk and just filling themselves with pleasure.